Welcome. In this compilation video, I will showcase some of the most intriguing paranormal content featured by the Paranormal Scholar in 2018. On the morning of the 6th of April 1966, in a suburb of Melbourne, Australia, students at the Westall High School were outside playing sports. Little did they know that they were about to be witness to what is said to be one of the most famous UFO incidents in history. According to witnesses standing on the sports field, an unidentified flying object flew over the high school's southwest corner. It then descended behind trees which lined an open wild paddock. After approximately 20 minutes of being out of sight, the mysterious object reappeared, with the group of witnesses on the sports field having now swelled in size. They reported the object as having gained altitude at considerable speed. Flying towards the northwest, 5 additional unidentified aircraft appeared as if to pursue the original object. This chase, described as a cat-and-mouse game by a teacher from the school, lasted a while before the original mysterious object and the 5 aircraft flew away from Westall High School and over the suburb of Clayton South. At the time, a science teacher at the high school, Andrew Greenwood, gave a detailed description of the aircraft to local media. He stated that the flying object was like a thin beam of light, about half the length of a light aircraft. It was silvery grey and seemed to thicken at times. The thickening was similar to when a disc is turned to show the underside. Testimonies from students seemed to confirm Greenwood's description, with it being described as saucer-shaped and silver grey in colour. 44 years after the event, in 2010, Terry Peck, who had been a student at the school at the time of the incident, stated that she still remembered what happened that day. She described how she and her classmates chased after the object when it started to descend behind the trees in the paddock. "I was about 6 meters away from it. It was bigger than a car and circular. I think I saw some lights underneath it. 2 girls were there before me. One was terribly upset and they were pale, really white, ghostly white. They just said that they had passed out, fainted. One was taken to hospital in an ambulance." As extraordinary as it sounds, Peck's testimony and the description of the object is one of many. Media reports from the time estimated that hundreds of children and a number of teachers witnessed the mysterious silver object that morning. Afterwards, students claim that they were told to keep quiet about what they had seen. This has led many to speculate that the government attempted to cover up the event. In 2010, Jacqueline Argent, who had witnessed the UFO as a student at Westall High School, came forward claiming to have been interrogated by 3 men in the headmaster's office. According to her testimony, they had good quality suits and were well spoken. They said, "I suppose you saw little green men." Of course, it is easy to discredit some of the later testimonies and allegations of conspiracy as a consequence of the bandwagon effect. Yet, skeptics who have studied the case in the decades that have followed have been unable to explain conclusively the strange schoolyard incident. Despite the suggestion of an object being an experimental aircraft, there is no evidence to support this theory. Not only that, no explanation has been provided to explain the 5 other aircraft which were described as pursuing the object. They said a number of small aeroplanes circled around it. However, a check later showed that no commercial, private, or RAAF pilots had reported anything unusual in the area. The closest explanation that has been provided to explain the Westall incident is a weather balloon, which was known to have been released in the area that day. However, witnesses affirmed that the object that they saw was very different from a weather balloon, and that it had both descended and ascended at high speed before being chased by other aircraft. If this is the case, the students and teachers of Westall High School may very well have been part of one of the biggest and most impressive mass UFO sightings in history. The Forest of Ludiac is one of the largest forests in the region of Brittany, France. Thought to have once been part of a vast forest which covered ancient inland Brittany, the forest's dense woodland arguably makes it the perfect place to conceal a crime. and certainly such a nefarious deed was attempted in 1710, when a quarrel between two rivals ended in death. An entry in the local parish register from the 11th of December 1710 records how a 21-year-old man called Jean was convicted of the murder of Pierre Leroy. Pierre's body was found at the foot of an oak tree deep within the Forest of Ludiac, after having been lured there by his friend Jean. The two, it was claimed, were in love with the same woman. Jealous and angered by his rival, Jean acted on drunken impulse and stabbed Pierre to death. He hoped that the forest would conceal his dark deed. However, Pierre's body was later discovered, and his killer was arrested, tried, and executed. Today, if you visit the location of the terrible crime, you will find 5 small holes in the forest floor. Local legend states that these holes are the very same ones created by Pierre's lifeless body, as it lay there waiting to be discovered. The holes are said to have been caused by the impact of his head, elbows, and heels when they fell to the ground. It is said that Pierre's spirit still haunts the forest today, and that his anger at having lost his life so tragically has cursed the very area of his demise. Local people warn that the 5 holes in the ground should not be covered or blocked, at the risk of meeting a terrible end within a year. Local media has reported that several years ago, legend met reality, when a local man died suddenly after visiting this supposedly cursed area of the forest. The man and a friend were drinking late at night in the forest when, gripped by bravado, he decided to plug one of Pierre's holes. When he died shortly afterwards, his friends and family blamed the curse. Eerily, the French National Office of Forests has erected a barrier around the holes to prevent anyone from getting too close, as well as a sign which warns visitors of the legendary curse. In North American folklore, small, bulbous-headed humanoids have been reported to attack innocent people. These bizarre creatures are known as Melonheads. Uniformly described as malicious, these peculiar humanoids are known across multiple states. In Michigan, the legend of the Melonheads is closely tied to Felt Mansion, an historic 3-story gable-roofed brick mansion in Laketown Township. Built in 1928 and used as a school, chapel, and a police station at various points in its history, the grand house had fallen into disrepair by the end of the century. It was after its abandonment in the 1990s that strange, bulbous-headed creatures were said to have moved in. As well as being spotted in the dilapidated mansion, eyewitnesses have also reported encountering Melonheads in wooded areas in bordering counties. In the past, local residents have approached media outlets with stories about the Melonheads. Al Meshkin, who grew up in Laketown, described how he heard the tales as a teenager and that the creatures were known as wobbleheads amongst his friends. And indeed, there are many local rumours to be heard. One claims that, far from being paranormal beings in their own right, Melonheads were once child patients at the Junction Insane Asylum, supposedly located close to Felt Mansion. Said to be sufferers of hydrocephalus or waterhead syndrome, the children endured physical and emotional abuse at the asylum, before being released into surrounding woodland when the establishment closed. Unsocialized and alone, the children are whispered to have turned feral, living in abandoned buildings and caverns within the forest, attacking members of the public who become frightened by their startling appearances. Whilst the local historical society has stated that the Junction Insane Asylum never existed, a correctional facility once stood where the asylum was said to be. Many people believe that it was from there that the Melonheads originated. Others in the area have dismissed the Melonhead legend as a confusion relating to the term used to describe brainy students at the St. Augustine Seminary, which operated out of Felt Mansion from 1949 until the 1960s. Yet, with reports of strange-looking creatures in the area, there are many who are unconvinced by this explanation. In Ohio, where the bizarre beings are also alleged to have been sighted, an alternative origin story is proposed. Local law implicates a doctor who became fascinated with radiation and its potential to create a new species of human. Known as Dr. Crow, this sinister figure is whispered to have tricked orphaned children into participating in his experiments. According to the tale, Crow's experiments led to the creation of monstrous mutated beings with large hairless heads and deformed bodies. Some of the orphans, it is claimed, were already sufferers of waterhead syndrome, meaning that their condition was worsened when the twisted doctor injected even more fluid into their brains. The legend concludes that Crow eventually met a grisly end when his experiments turned on him before burning down the orphanage and fleeing into the surrounding forests. Today, it is still rumoured that the offspring of these original creatures can be spotted along Wisner Road in Kirtland, close to where the orphanage is said to have once stood. According to a local newspaper, ever since the orphanage burned down, residents of Kirtland have reported strange sightings of short, naked creatures with large heads roaming the woods. Rarely a week goes by without there being a report of paranormal activity on the 15-mile-long A75 road in Scotland. Its reputation for bizarre occurrences have led many to title it the most haunted road in Scotland. Weaving westwardly from the Anglo-Scottish border, it is the Kinmount Strait part of the route which seems to produce the most inexplicable reports. Bob Sturgeon, who used to run a snack bar along the notorious road, in 2013 described how lorry drivers who had parked overnight along the A75 would be traumatized by the morning. Seeking refuge at his snack bar, they would relate tales of parades of ghostly people and other strange experiences. Diversity of experience is something which makes the A75 stand apart from other haunted highways. According to local paranormal investigator Kathleen Croney, paranormal accounts include screaming hags, eyeless phantoms, and a menagerie of unearthly creatures. One of the most famous reports of paranormal activity on the A75 dates back to 1962. Derek and Norman Ferguson were driving when a large hen flew towards the car windscreen. The two men then witnessed a great menagerie of phantom creatures, including big cats, pass in front of the car. In addition to ghoulish animals, a common sighting includes groups of bedraggled medieval people pulling handcarts or carrying bundles. Some have reported seeing a ghostly man with no eyes. Most terrifyingly, however, are reports from shaken drivers believing that they have ran over people who suddenly emerged from the darkness. The following is such a testimony from a local resident called Donna Maxwell. It was in July when I was driving back from my mother's house around 10 p.m. on a clear, well-lit night. All of a sudden, a man appeared in front of my car and just stood there, looking sad. I was doing about 50 miles per hour and I slammed on the brakes. I was convinced I hit him, but I couldn't see anyone, so drove to the police station. The police went out and searched for a body, but found nothing. I couldn't understand it. Since then I have heard other people talking about seeing the same man standing in the road just looking at the cars. Maybe he is searching for someone. I don't regard myself as someone who believes in the paranormal, but after that I have changed my mind. I still can't go down that road at night. I take the bypass instead. One of the earliest reports of phantom phone calls dates back to the early 20th century, when a London solicitor, David Wilson, received bizarre messages on a machine he had made himself from a wireless telegraph. Devised to use the Morse code system, Wilson's communication machine first received strange messages in 1913 when used by his friend. The signals were delivered in Morse as audible beeps. Astonishingly, the device continued to relay messages even after the receiving wire had been disconnected. With the help of a second witness, Wilson translated each message as they came through. The telephonic messages the machine received appeared to be meaningful. In January 1915, this was received. Great difficulty, await message, 5 days, 6 evening. Similar instructional phrases like wait until next Tuesday also came through. However, despite waiting, nothing ever happened that illuminated on the message's meanings. Confused as to why he was receiving such messages without any input, the solicitor invited researchers to inspect his machine and try to explain the source of the Morse code. No explanation and no source of the signal could be found. After publishing his experiments, David Wilson and his Morse code communications disappeared from the records. The case of David Wilson inspired others to ponder the possibility of electronic communications being delivered from beyond the grave. Some even took the idea further, purposefully constructing machines to aid in interdimensional communication. From 1920 to 1921, the English-born psychic medium and composer Francis Grierson claimed to have had detailed conversations with spirits on the other side by means of a psychophone. Far from speaking with any old ordinary Joe, Grierson published transcripts of conversations with Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Benjamin Franklin. These conversations were extensive and intelligent, and by deviating from contemporary popular opinions, seemed to suggest insight and opinion unconstrained by the time in which they were received. In Grierson's own words, the psychophonic waves by which the messages were imparted are as definite as those received by wireless methods. As unbelievable as Grierson's reports may seem, he was far from alone in his claims. Telephonic communication experiments were something of a trend in the 1920s. With the help of his eldest son, British psychical researcher F.R. Melton designed and built a psychic telephone in an attempt to converse with the dead. He even published a booklet which described in detail the different components of the machine, as well as containing expected elements including a transmitter, receiver, and battery. Melton's design included a balloon at the center, which was filled with the breath of a psychic medium. In 1920, during an interview for Scientific American, inventor Thomas Edison discussed his plans to construct a similar machine. In his own words, "I do claim that it is possible to construct an apparatus which will be so delicate that if there are personalities in another existence or sphere who wish to get in touch with us, in this existence or sphere, this apparatus will at least give them a better opportunity to express themselves than tilting tables and raps and Ouija boards and mediums and other crude methods now purported to be the only means of communication." When Edison died in 1931, the fate of this invention was unknown. Some records suggest that he did indeed build a spirit phone, but that it failed to produce results. Whatever the case may be, no blueprints for any such apparatus designed by Edison are known to exist. There exists an old maritime legend that tells of a ghost ship that is said to be cursed to sail the seas forever, never to make port again. An omen of doom, it foreshadows disaster for any and all who see it. This legendary vessel is called the Flying Dutchman. The oldest known print reference to the phantom ship can be found in travels in various parts of Europe, Asia and Africa, which was published in 1790 by John MacDonald. In one of the chapters, MacDonald describes sailing around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa when his ship ran into bad weather. One of our best seamen was easing himself on the head, and the sea washed him away. He called out, a rope, Captain," but he disappeared and was never seen afterwards. The weather was so stormy that the sailors said that they saw the Flying Dutchman. The common story is that this Dutchman came to the Cape in distress of weather and wanted to get into harbour, but could not get a pilot to conduct her and was lost, and that ever since, in very bad weather, her vision appears. Literary references to the notorious ship continued throughout the end of the 1700s and into the 19th and 20th centuries. An otherworldly glowing light was said to accompany the vessel. Yet, above all, it was said that the ship's appearance predicted disasters. The worst omen of all for a sailor, it was said that those who see the Flying Dutchman are doomed to meet a terrible fate. John Leyden, a Scottish Orientalist writing in the 19th century, described how the Flying Dutchman was a common superstition amongst mariners. He wrote about alleged encounters which seemed to confirm MacDonald's earlier report. The spectral ship was most frequently spotted off the coast of South Africa. Hurricanes there are frequently ushered in by the appearance of a spectre ship, denominated as the Flying Dutchman. At the dead of night, the luminous form of a ship glides rapidly, with topsails flying and sailing straight in the wind's eye. The crew of this vessel are supposed to have been guilty of some dreadful crime in the infancy of navigation and to have been stricken with the pestilence. They were hence refused admittance into every port, and are ordained still to traverse the ocean on which they perished, till the period of their penance expires. Far from being spotted by lone witnesses, the Flying Dutchman is often seen by many sailors at the same time. On the 11th of July 1881 at 4 a.m. off the coast of Australia, Prince George of Wales, the future King George V of the United Kingdom, reported encountering the ship. As well as the Prince, 13 crew members on board HMS Inconstant attested to witnessing a strange red light come out of the pre-dawn darkness. The Prince's log described how a great ship suddenly came up on the port bow, where also the officer of the watch from the bridge clearly saw her. After it passed, no sign whatever of any material ship was to be seen either near or right away to the horizon, the night being clear and the sea calm. Later that day, at 10:45 a.m, the seaman who first reported the Flying Dutchman fell from the foretopmast to his death. As in all reported cases, sighting the Flying Dutchman foreshadowed catastrophe. In 1185, near to present-day Shimonoseki in Japan, one of the bloodiest sea battles of the era was fought, the Battle of Dan-no-ura. There, the forces of the Heike clan clashed with the Minamoto in a bid for supremacy over Japan. Despite being outnumbered, the Minamoto won the battle, aided by a traitorous general who switched sides during the fighting. With his help, the clan's forces were able to identify the ship which held the 6-year-old Heike Emperor of Japan. Realizing that the battle was lost, many of the Heike could not stand to live with defeat. These soldiers, alongside their child emperor and his grandmother, never set foot on land again. The lives lost in this battle are said to have been so numerous and tragic that they have haunted the shores for hundreds of years afterwards into the present day. In the years that followed the battle, it was said that the spirits of the lost warriors would appear in the waves to drown swimmers and sink boats, dragging them down into the dark ocean. The terror induced by these grisly encounters compelled local Buddhists to erect a shrine in 1191 to appease the lost souls. A cemetery was also erected by the beach, with the names of the young emperor and his vassals inscribed on monuments within it. These tributes, as well as the performance of regular remembrance services, are said to have helped assuage the angry spirits. However, this did not quieten them altogether. Reports from the early 20th century describe how fishermen in the area attested to witnessing thousands of pale, ghostly fires hover above the waves on dark nights, a phenomenon which they call onibiai, or demon fire. Whenever the wind picks up, they allege that a great shouting is heard coming from the sea, as though a battle were occurring. Peculiarly, it is not just the seas which are allegedly haunted by the spirits of the lost Heike warriors, but also its wildlife. A strange breed of local crab in the area, known as Heike crabs, are said to contain the faces of the dead, imprinted onto their shells. John and Mary Robertson, a married couple living in Jersey City in the 1960s, shared a passion for UFO research. What began as an interest turned into something more sinister around 1968, when John and Mary began to experience bizarre activity. After returning home on an evening, it looked as though someone had been in their apartment, rummaging through their UFO files. Startlingly, one day whilst home alone, Mary noticed a strange man in black standing rigidly by the doorway of the building next to their apartment. He had an unsettling look on his face and seemed emotionally detached. After witnessing the strange man for 4 days, Mary was unnerved and told her husband. After showing John where the man in black had been, he too started noticing the strange figure hanging around outside their apartment. The man was described as looking dark and swarthy, always possessing a nerve-jangling expression. Around the same time, Mary and John also noticed that there were strange clicking noises on their phone lines, as if they were being tapped. The couple became very troubled by the persistent presence of this stalker, believing him to be surveying the building and examining everyone who entered and left. With their UFO files clearly disturbed, they also claimed that the mysterious man had entered their home to make copies of their research. After persistently calling their friends and fellow UFO researchers Timothy Green Beckley and Jim Moseley for help, the two men decided to drive around to the Robertsons early in the morning to confront their tormentor. Once there, they saw the mysterious man and photographed him. The pair then parked around the corner in the hope of gaining more information about the man in black. However, before they had the chance to find out any more, he had vanished. Since the incident, different theories have been proposed in regards to the Robertsons' man in black. Jim Moseley has stated that he believes that the man in black was spying on the couple for nefarious purposes related to their UFO research, and that after he noticed someone had photographed him, disappeared. Timothy Green Beckley, on the other hand, believes that the man was possibly undertaking some illegal activity regularly and was scared away when he saw that a photograph of him had been taken. Whatever the truth, the man in black was never seen again by the Robertsons. Lusca is a general term used to describe sea monsters reported from the Caribbean. Many reports of such creatures come from blue holes, large marine caverns and sinkholes which extend well below sea level. As blue holes may provide access to submerged cave passages, cryptozoologists believe that such locations may very well conceal hitherto unknown species of sea creatures. One case of a Lusca dates back to 1896, when a large carcass washed up on a beach in the United States near St. Augustine, Florida. The strange remains soon became known as the St. Augustine Monster due to the fact that it appeared to be an as of yet to be discovered marine animal. It was the evening of the 30th of November 1896 when the carcass was first spotted by two boys who had been riding their bikes along the coast. The day after, the boys returned to their peculiar discovery with a local physician, Dr. Webb. Due to its enormous size, the decaying mass had half sunk into the sand. Upon closer inspection, the pale pink bulk was found to be composed of a rubbery substance, which could only be cut with great difficulty. The mass appeared to have the stumps of at least 4 arms. From what could be seen of the half-buried carcass, it was huge. It measured 18 feet long and 7 feet wide. It was estimated to weigh at least 5 tons. Dr. Webb's first impression was that it was the mutilated remains of a giant octopus in an advanced state of decomposition. With identification provided by a man of science, one would think this would be the end of the St. Augustine Monster case. However, it was not to be. As the media spread news of the discovery, other academics and eyewitnesses came forward to offer different theories as to what the stranded mass could be. To many, it was regarded as a monster of legend. In early January of the next year, a storm tide dragged the carcass back out to sea. It re-emerged 2 miles south of its original location, having been washed ashore on Crescent Beach. This provided the opportunity for academics to re-examine the mysterious remains. One such specialist was Professor Addison Emery Verrill of Yale, at the time the foremost authority on cephalopods, namely squid and octopus. At first, he suggested that the St. Augustine Monster was the remains of a giant squid. Yet, the Yale professor soon changed his mind, stating that the beast was not a giant squid, but rather an octopus of enormous, previously unknown to science proportions. Throughout the examination of the perplexing creature, numerous photographs were taken and sketches made. Due to its enormous size, interest in the carcass was widespread, with dozens of volunteers gathering at the beach to help with the examination. Yet, it was the very size of the creature which was the problem. According to a local news sheet, its great size and immense weight have thus far prevented it from being moved for a more careful examination. A dozen men with blocks and tackle not being able to even turn it over. Eventually, Dr. Webb and a team of 6 horses were able to drag the mass further inland, so that it would not be washed out to sea again. Aside from becoming something of a short-lived tourist attraction, no one knows what happened to the carcass. Evidently still unsure, Professor Verrill's final word on the matter was that the creature was not an octopus or squid, but the detached head of a sperm whale. In more modern times, samples from the carcass in the 19th century have been reanalyzed. Yet, far from clarifying the identity of the strange remains, they have only complicated the mystery. In 1971, Dr. Joseph F. Gennaro Jr., a cell biologist at the University of Florida, compared the connective tissue of the St. Augustine carcass with known octopus and squid species. His findings proved beyond any doubt that the creature was not a whale's head, as Verrill had concluded. Rather, the St. Augustine Monster was in fact an octopus. Using knowledge of the bodily proportions of known octopus species, the implication was that the carcass represented a gigantic sea creature with arms 75 to 100 feet in length, meaning a total spread of 200 feet. In 1986, further scientific analysis supported this conclusion, stating that the creature had most likely been an octopus, not referable to any known species. Yet, in 1995 and 2004, the identity of the monstrous remains was once again challenged. This time, scientific data suggested that the creature had not been an octopus, squid, or the head of a sperm whale. Rather, it was now described as simply being a big blob of whale blubber. With so many different scientific interpretations, the identity of the St. Augustine Monster remains unresolved. Was it merely whale blubber, misidentified by 19th century academics? Or was it the remains of a yet-to-be-discovered species of giant octopus, a creature capable of remaining hidden, lurking in blue holes and underwater caverns, invisible to even the most modern of scientific technologies? The idea of loved ones easing the passage to the realm of the dead is frequently reported across many cultures. Ginny Chapella, a senior coordinator of bereavement services at a hospice in Florida with over 20 years' experience, has described deathbed visitations as being so common I don't think much about them anymore. Indeed, staff at the hospice have got into the habit of referring to such experiences as the gathering of spirits. One of Chapella's earliest experiences of a gathering of spirits occurred while she was caring for a lady who was dying at home. About 5 days before her death, she reported seeing a man looking in the window. This was out in the country, and we were concerned that it was a peeping Tom. But when the man came back, she told us that it was her brother who had died many years earlier. "He's just waiting for me," she said. "I'll go with him the next time he comes." According to Chapella, these visitations make the dying process much easier for both the dying and the bereaved. Such deathbed visitations are much more common than sightings of angelic beings or indeed the traditional hooded Grim Reaper. Anecdotes of deathbed visions of deceased loved ones have appeared in literature and biographies for centuries, but it wasn't until the 1900s that the topic became the subject of scientific scrutiny. In 1977, Dr. Carlos Osis of the American Society for Psychical Research published a book titled At the Hour of Death. During his research in the years previous, Osis examined thousands of case studies and interviewed more than 1,000 doctors and nurses. After analysis of these testimonies, he was able to identify various consistencies found in deathbed visitations that are not easily explained. Far from reporting an array of awe-inspiring mythical beings, dying people generally reported being visited by people that they knew who had passed away, deceased family members and friends. These familiar people were described in believable terms, with the experiencers still aware of their real surroundings and conditions. From the perspective of medical professionals, they appeared lucid and did not seem to be hallucinating or in an altered state of consciousness. Most compelling, however, was how Osis observed that pre-existing beliefs were irrelevant. Whether or not the dying person believed in an afterlife, the experience and reactions were the same. Whilst Grim Reapers have been portrayed as a multitude of fantastical and fearsome creatures in folklore, real-life cases of the dying being visited at the moment of death are overwhelmingly personal in nature. Friends and family who have predeceased the dying person are often described as being present. These soothing encounters couldn't be more different from the imaginings which led to the creation of the hooded Grim Reaper of our medieval past. Until we ourselves are faced with a Death Reaper, however, we are forced to be left pondering that great and final mystery. In the final words of one dying man, who told his daughter that there was a loved one standing right there with her hands on his shoulders, "You can't see them, but someday you'll understand what it is like." Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe for more of the paranormal. To watch the featured videos in full, you can find all of the video links in the description. Equally, you can check out last year's compilation, the link to which is on screen now.